Welcome to an overview of the Kentucky Arts Partnership Grant FY2025 application cycle. My name is Sarah Schmidt, and I am the administrator of this particular grant program, and this is my contact information. If you've never applied before, these are the intentions of this grant program. It's general operating support for the day-to-day expenses of Kentucky arts and cultural organizations whose primary mission it is to provide Kentuckians with year-round arts programming. These funds are awarded through a combined pool of money from the Kentucky General Assembly and the National Endowment for the Arts. So we're accountable for these funds to both the federal and state governments, and we have to demonstrate a very rigorous vetting and oversight process to each, especially for these minimally restricted operating support funds. However, if, like me, you think that the small sum of money that you get is not commensurate with the work that you have to do to get it, and that you all deserve so much more, please don't blame the work. The work that you do on this application is irrefutable proof of your value to the Commonwealth. Instead, please tell the people who can do something about it. In fact, we'd love to see you on January 10th at Kentucky Arts Day. This is a rare opportunity to come to Frankfort and tell your state policymakers why this support is valuable, necessary, and that frankly there should be more of it. We also hope that the resources and data you provide for this grant can be used in other applications to funders. Everything that I'm going to tell you in this overview is also available in the guidelines. They are extensive and they're the final word. All of the dates, the rules, and the requirements are there, and they're informed by our commitment to the NEA and our cabinet's legal team. For those of you who have applied before, it will feel mostly similar except for a few new things. I've eliminated at least 4 narrative background questions. The fonts for the explanatory text are much larger. There are more opportunities for you to show off the ways you've gone above and beyond, rather than be penalized for not meeting mandatory criteria. I designed the application myself this year so I had more control over the features that were employed in the GoSmart application portal, and I was able to make use of conditional logic to remove irrelevant fields for certain organizations. So any question that is relevant to only under certain conditions will reflect that. For example, if you check the box indicating that you are not a membership-based organization, which is fine, not all of you are, you'll not be confronted with an upload field for that feature. Conversely, if and only if you indicate that you're a membership or subscription organization, will you have the option to upload your materials for those programs. Who may apply? You have to be legally chartered in, headquartered in, and host your home seasons in Kentucky. That's not to say that you can't do other things in other states, but you have to be chartered here, headquartered here, and primarily host most of your arts activities in Kentucky. Arts has to be the primary focus. There are quite a few cultural organizations around the state that use arts as a way to serve their mission. But in order to be eligible for this grant, arts needs to be the primary focus, or at least equally important with the other parts of your mission. You have to provide year-round public activity and programming. We do understand that especially performing arts groups have seasons, and therefore a lot of your activity is condensed into one time frame. However, if you were to look at that and sort of smash it out and spread it across the year, would it still look like year-round support for the arts? In other words, are you providing a significant amount of arts programming in that time period that it would constitute a year-round impact? So that's fine if that's the case for you. You do have to be independent of any other organization. So for example, you can't be a subgroup of a larger umbrella organization that has a lot of different types of missions and scopes, and you can't have a fiscal agent. You have to be your own fiscal agent. And I realize that it is a benefit to combine resources in this way, and although we'd like to reward that, it is very complicated in terms of our reporting. And it makes it difficult to demonstrate the impact of the arts when it's absorbed into another type of organization. You can be a part of city and county government only if you are serving as that city or county government's local arts agencies. If you have questions about whether or not you qualify for that particular criteria, then please contact me. You can be an internal program of an academic institution. However, we will only accept one application per academic institution. So for example, if you're a university, your performing arts organization or program could not apply along with your visual arts. We would only be able to take one application from that institution for one program. And you have to serve, feature, produce, or present professional artists, and you have to serve the entire community. So you'll need to make the case that this program doesn't exist just to serve the student body, that it's something that the community at large also appreciates, invests in, and engage with, and you also have to produce, feature, or somehow present professional artists, not just students or faculty. You have to have a current 501c3 IRS tax exempt status or equivalent. So any of our nonprofits, of course, are going to have that 501c3 status. The academic institutions and the municipalities should provide something equivalent to prove their status. You will have to provide that as an upload. You do have to provide a board-approved long-range plan or strategic plan or 5-year plan or whatever your institution calls it. And you have to provide us with a fiscal responsibility review commensurate with your budget size. And I'll talk about what kind is going to be necessary for which size organization. If you applied last year and your GAF and your first payment were significantly delayed, pending any unforeseen chaos, that should not be the case this summer. We have a new grants manager, Macy Lowe, and she's wonderful, and we have a new budget specialist, Nicole Griffin, who is just as amazing. Both have come in like houses on fire and got active at learning their positions and solving decades-old issues and how we do things. So your GAF and your first payment should be on time this summer. The program timeline is similar to every grant cycle for KAP. The application deadline is February 15th. The application review by panel will happen in late April and May. The board will review those panel recommendations and vote on them in June, mid-June. You'll be notified as soon as possible after that board review. You may begin your grant fund usage on July 1, and then the use of grant funds must conclude by June 30th. And then you'll have a final report that's due 30 days later on July 30th, 2025. If you've not applied before, some things that you need to get prepared now if you intend to apply. We require a unique entity identifier and a Kentucky vendor code. It's permissible for these to be in process while you're applying, but we must receive them before June for the board approval, and we will not make any award without them. Instructions on how and where to apply for these are in the guidelines. Both processes at this point are currently pretty quick. The NEA requires all of our grantees to have this UEI, and the vendor code is for payments. The vendor code is a small amount of trouble on the front end, but it ensures that making your electronic transfer is a little easier come August. Some other things you'll want to get together before you begin your application are your IRS determination letter or equivalent document. Again, your organization must be a 501c3 or something of that nature for a municipality or a university program, and we do need proof of that current status. We also need a board list. If you've applied before, please mind the new format. I've asked you to indicate some demographic information about your board on that list rather than asking it as several narrative questions. We also require a staff list. I realize that this can be a little bit of a silly task for those of you that have either one paid staff member or no paid staff members, but we still do require you to provide a staff list. We'll need your current operating budget. So at that point, it'll be our fiscal year 24, or essentially what you're using right now to plan your program and pay your bills. We want to know how you're operating in your current moment. And then we'll need an audit, financial review, or statement from your most recently completed fiscal year. Now, for some of you, that will be the fiscal year that you completed in June, or for some of you, it will be the fiscal year that you completed last December, or equivalent depending on when your fiscal year ends. But basically, we want your most recently completed fiscal year, and there's some wiggle room there. It can be the most current or the most recent that you have in hand, because we know that your CPAs do not work on our time frame. And audits and financial reviews from an external firm are going to take a while. You can also put a placekeeper document in there if you have one in process. You just need to demonstrate to me that you do have one in process and you do intend to have it in ideally before the application goes to panel. If not, certainly before it goes to the board in June, and at the very least before we award the grant funding. So here are the criteria, and I encourage you to look at the guidelines because it's easier to read this than it is to hear it. Organizations with prior year expenses of $1 million or more must provide an audited financial statement performed by an independent CPA. Note that this amount has changed. It used to be $500,000 in expenses. We have moved that up to $1 million because of the rising costs of audits. Organizations with prior year expenses of $250,000 to $999,999 must provide a financial review performed by an independent CPA. Now, I've had questions about this because the cost of an official financial review may be almost as much as an audit. However, we cannot have any more wiggle room in this area. However, if you already have a firm that does your fiscal responsibility, that takes care of your books, essentially, they're still an independent CPA, so you don't need to find a second firm to then do a review. The difference between this and a statement is that it is performed externally by a firm that does fiscal responsibility for you. It is not prepared by staff. Now, organizations with prior year expenses of under $249,999 can provide an internally prepared balance sheet. So if that is clear as mud, please look at it in the guidelines, and if you have questions, please feel free to email me. You also have to provide a long range or strategic plan, and it has to be board approved. We ask you also for some event information. This can be a compilation of flyers, web listings, a calendar of events, or even just a word processing document with the title, date, time, attendance of the things that you have done in the previous year. You just want to give your panelists a sense of what you have year-round as arts events in a typical year. Next, you'll need to provide an accessibility checklist. This is informed directly by the NEA's interpretations of the 2010 Americans with Disability Act guidelines. You will download this directly from the guidelines, our guidelines for KAP, or the grants portal itself. You'll check the boxes that you are able to check, and then you will upload it. You will also need to provide a cultural equity plan. I know that some organizations have a cultural equity plan that's sort of embedded in their long range plan. That's fine. You can pull that text out and then upload it separately as your cultural equity plan. We also know that everyone's at a different place in making, perfecting, and working these plans, and you'll have an opportunity to explain where you are in the narrative response that's near the upload field for the cultural equity plan. Some documents that are required for some and not others. Again, you'll have logical, conditional logic for this that will keep you from having to upload them if it's not relevant to you. So for example, membership organization or membership information, which we've already talked about. If you have members or subscribers, we need that information about those programs and how many of those members and subscribers you have. We need an organizational charts for organizations that are above a certain size so that you can explain the hierarchy, who answers to who, and this is only if you have more than 2 staff positions. We need an eligible revenue statement from some organizations. Not all will need this. This is basically a worksheet. It can be downloaded just like the accessibility checklist directly from the guidelines or applications. It's only required for organizations with total revenue figures from your audits, financial reviews, or statements that include in-kind contributions that have been assigned a cash value and then added in as income or revenue, or donations to endowments, capital funds for new constructions, and earnings from endowments that were not drawn down for expenditures during that period or that fiscal year. Those are the only 4 circumstances under which you will need to provide one of these eligible revenue statements. So if your total revenue does not include any of these 4 things, then your total revenue and eligible revenue are one and the same, and you can omit this form and not worry about it. The reason we do this is so that organizations don't artificially boost their revenue or income for a year with these 4 things in order to receive larger awards, because we do base your funding or your award amount on your eligible revenue. Some items that are not required but encouraged are a disaster preparedness plan. If you have one of those, please include it. If you have an advocacy plan, you will have a place for that. Letters of support, promotional material that were not really, maybe not relevant to event information, but you still wanted to include. Media reviews, an annual report if you produce one of those, and work sample videos as URLs. Again, these things aren't required, but these are the areas where you can show off what you've done above and beyond, but not be penalized for not having. Here are some important things to keep in mind when signing into our online application portal called GoSmart. If you're a returning applicant, please do not create a new profile. I cannot consolidate them. And if you have multiple profiles, you're going to have issues later accessing your reporting forms when the time comes. It really puts a wrench in our reporting as well, and it's going to make your future life very complicated. The better thing to do, just send us an email or call us, and we can help reset your password, change the email address if that is changed and that's the issue, or otherwise just reset it so that you can get in, and your future self in July will be very grateful that that's the way that we did that. Do definitely go into your profile as soon as possible, even if you don't even plan to do the application until after the 1st of the calendar year. And make sure that everything is up to date. Make sure that the leadership is still the same, or if it needs to change, make sure that you change that. Make sure to include your UEI if you've not done that already, and just, give us all of the information that we need as current as possible. The other thing you want to do is make sure that the addresses match. So your Kentucky vendor code profile, your profile in GoSmart, and later on your grant agreement form all have to have addresses that match. Payment can be significantly delayed by discrepancies in addresses. The Treasury does not allow us to make payments to any person or entity who comes across as having multiple addresses. They just keep spitting our request back out like an old dollar bill from a vending machine. And so it's best to make sure that all 3 areas where you need to include your address match. If you are a new applicant, definitely go in and create a new profile. You will designate that as an organization profile, and then you will log in and click on current programs and applications, and you'll go to the Kentucky Arts Partnership 2025 area to begin your application. Even if you're not ready to get started on your application just yet, just be aware that these are some of the data and demographic questions that we ask you, and you may have to collect those from around different parts of your organizations. So get those ready to go before you begin. We ask about the people you served. It is broken down by age group. We ask about the artists you engaged and employed and their demography. We ask about the people you served by their race and other distinct groups. These are questions mandated by the NEA, so definitely look at that NEA page of the application if you have any questions about that. We also ask about the numbers of paying attendees versus free attendees. For those of you who have facilities, we ask about your seating and wall space, if those are relevant, if you're a performing arts venue or a museum and gallery. We ask about your board demography. We ask about your board's process for making decisions and how board members are nominated and selected. We also ask about meeting attendance and things like that. We ask about staff, volunteer numbers, and their demography. And then we also ask about your eligible revenue. So you're going to need your most recently completed fiscal year available in order to provide that number, because that is what we base your award on. The narrative questions are divided into 4 topics or areas. I did a lot of work consolidating the narrative questions on last year's application, so those won't be significantly different if you've applied before. We're going to look at this overview, but then I'm going to talk about specific questions under each of the areas individually. Each question is going to have a list of suggested things to include in the response. So the question itself is very short, but then I offer you some clarification about the intention of the question and give you some topics or areas to help get started in writing the response. These questions are phrased as shoulds by design. They're things that if you're doing them, you should definitely include them. If you're not, that's okay. It's not a criteria or a criterion, but you should be inspiring to include them or working toward them in the future. Again, they are not musts, but they are shoulds. I have increased the font on these shoulds with the application because they were made for ants last year. But the 4 themes which have not changed are delivery, capacity, value and role of the arts, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And you can see they're all weighted differently based on both the number of questions that are asked under each theme and then the value that we put on these things as the Arts Council. The first thematic area is delivery, and it features 4 questions, 40 points total, 10 points per question. The first question is simply, describe how your organization plans and assesses its programs. Under that, you're going to see a list of things that you should, not must, but should include, and your response might have things like when and how programs are planned, who's involved in the planning process, including your relevant partners, how and by whom are decisions made, what are your criteria for determining and ensuring artistic or programming quality, how are artists involved, and what are your strategies for measuring the success of these programs, and how is that assessment conducted. Most of the questions are going to be phrased similarly. It's a short question, but then a lot of suggestions about things you can include. Another example is describe your communication strategies. And then I suggest that you include things like how you distribute information about programs. What's your marketing and branding like? Do you have a kit? Do you have a logo? Do you have Information available for anybody that wants to showcase your organization. How do you reach new or niche audiences? And what are the relevant partnerships in media, local tourism, etc. that help you reach new audiences? This section also features a question about your education outreach and services and how you evaluate the success of your delivery. We ask you for an education contact as well. That's new this year. We have a brand new education director, and she would like to make opportunities available for the person or people within your organization that are responsible for contacts, particularly with K through 12 schools. The second section is capacity. It features 2 questions, 20 points total, 10 points apiece. The first question is pretty direct and includes no specific suggestions. Describe your policies and procedures for ensuring fiscal controls and financial responsibilities. The second question, describe your development strategy, suggests you include things like your consistent and reliable sources of funding, the efforts your organization will make to obtain new sources of funding, your planned fundraising activities such as benefits events, gives days, and participation in membership drives. Include any relevant partnerships and relationships that support your development strategy. This is also the area where if you have completed a disaster preparedness plan, or even if you're in the works of a disaster preparedness plan, you can show it off here. Value and role of the arts is the most heavily weighted again this year. It's worth 30 points total, with only 2 questions worth 15 points each. And the first question is, describe how the organization provides public value. And this is arguably the most important question you will answer. This is the big why. This is the only question I would ask if it were up to me. And I encourage folks to answer this question with the thought of, if my organization were gone tomorrow, who would miss us? What hole would be left in our local art scene, and how would it affect community vitality? Now I want you to flip that into a positive thought and include things like how you respond to arts and non-arts needs through your programs and services. What are the partnerships you have that maximize your resources and fulfill needs? And then I want you to give me lots of concrete examples of the impact you have on your communities, an area like cultural enhancement, community identity, and economic development. The second question, describe your organization's arts advocacy strategy, is arguably the hardest to answer, so the should statements really help here. Your response should include the following. How is your organization communicated regularly and effectively with local officials, especially state legislators? We do care about the relationships you have with your county judge executive, your mayor, your city commission, but ultimately, the majority of the funding for this program comes from state legislators and how they affect policy, and therefore we would like to know how you engage with your state legislators. How do you involve your public officials in the activities of your organization in ways that demonstrate your value to the community? How does your organization talk about and share arts experiences with people who support and influence positive change? And then what are your relevant partnerships and memberships with local, state, and national arts advocacy groups that support your advocacy strategy? If you've got an advocacy plan or calendar, you'll have a chance to upload it here. And we also ask for a board advocacy contact. And we have done this every year. However, we have put it back up in the application in the organization information page, and I think it serves better down here where you're actually answering your advocacy's question. Again, this is a good opportunity to remind you that if you participate in Kentucky Arts Day, you should say so. And if you're a member of Kentuckians for the Arts, you should also include this in your response. The final theme, or the final area, is diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. This one is 1 question and it's worth 10 points, as well as an upload that kind of goes along with it. It simply asks, describe your efforts to build diversity within the organization and among program participants. And your response should include the following. The process your organization used to develop its cultural equity plan and include any notable progress. Talk about any relevant arts and non-arts partnerships that help fulfill your equity plan goals. I used to ask 4 or 3 narrative questions earlier in the application about your board, staff, and volunteer representation of diversity, but I have since moved that as one of the you should include things under this question. Talk about your internal activities that are meant to grow cultural competency among your staff, board, and volunteers, including trainings, facilitated conversations. Talk about specific examples of successful programs or services that took your artistic product to new or broader audiences. And again, in this area, you'll also have the opportunity to upload your cultural equity plan. I sometimes jokingly call our GoSmart online application portal the Fisher-Price Grants portal because it doesn't allow a lot of freedom in formatting, although it's getting better and better each year. And some of the pages are mandatory and not necessarily editable like those NEA data questions. But the good thing about its rudimentary nature is that it won't let you get into too much trouble, but here are some tips on how to use it. We have to sometimes use a text field to collect number data, which is okay if the applicant just types in the numbers. So if I ask you for a dollar amount or a number of participants or something where I'm asking you to put a numeral in, just use the numeral. Like, don't include $, don't include +, don't include approximately, don't spell it out as alpha as opposed to numeric, and just put numbers in the number field. You don't even have to put a comma in for thousands, just the numbers. And what that does is when I run a report, I can easily add those numbers together to show combined impact. Whereas if there's any kind of text symbol in there, it will not add it effectively until I take all 107 out, and that can be a little bit complicated. Click save often. Kind of get in the habit of obsessively clicking save every time you, especially if you put long text in. It's kind of difficult to accidentally not save something in this application, but I think it'll give you more peace of mind if you use that save button as often as you can. Also use the "Did I complete this page" function. When you get to the end of your application page, there is a little button that you can click that will let you know, hey, I forgot to fill out this field, or I didn't put the right type of data in there. Use that before moving on, and what that will do is when you get to the application, you won't be confronted with something that you didn't include right before you turn it in. You can ask that question on the page itself and correct that early on rather than later on. PDFs aren't preferred. I would say PDFs are required. They are much simpler for the panelist to view. In order for the panelist to view a Word document or an Excel file, they actually have to click through a couple of different areas to do that, whereas a PDF just pops right up. So if you have Word documents or Excel files, please convert them to PDFs. It will make it so much easier for your panelists. If you're having difficulty doing that, I'm actually happy to help convert documents for you so that your application can be as stress-free for the panelists as possible. And then last but not least, GoSmart takes a minute to fully submit. So don't wait until 11:52 on the deadline to submit. It may be late. I would give it an extra hour just in case. Don't assume that if you submitted at 11:59 that you have gotten it in, because it is not necessarily automatic. And here are just a few general grant writing tips that I say would almost apply to any Arts Council grant or any grant in general. Start your application immediately. Do go in and read the entire set of guidelines and know them well so you can ask questions now, especially in regard to eligibility. I would rather you contact me about your eligibility now, and even though it will be a hard discussion, I may have to tell you no. It's better for me to tell you no now than when you've already filled out an entire application and I have to send you that letter that says you're ineligible. So let's talk about it now rather than later. I say do all of your written responses in a word processor before you include them in GoSmart. The only thing to be clear about on that is that GoSmart has a character limit and a character count. And so if you copy and paste, make sure that nothing got cut off. So go ahead and read through everything you've copied and pasted to make sure everything made it into that field. And get all of your uploads together now and ready to go rather than piecemeal them together while you're doing the application. Don't make the panelists hunt for information. Put them under the appropriate heading and question. I know that sometimes we borrow text from other applications we've done for other funders or even our own website or other things that one-pagers and things we've completed about our organization. And I think that's great and that's fine. But do make sure that when you're kind of using that recycled text, that it still makes sense with the question that's being asked and it's under the appropriate heading. Don't make them go hunt for it elsewhere. It'll just make it harder to, you want your application to be as easy to review as possible, because bear in mind that they're doing 20 of these a piece, and so you don't want to provide them with any irritation. If you say that you are going to do something, go ahead and say it outright. Say, we have firm plans to do this and we intend to do it. Not that you hope to or wish to. Tentative language comes across as sort of flaky or flimsy, and you want to come from a place of strength. And that also is related to a reminder that this is not a needs-based grant, it's a merit-based grant. You can be honest about your challenges, but don't write an invitation to a pity party. It's not going to have the effect you think it does. Come from a place of strength, and even if you have challenges, come from a place of resilience. Give the panelists enough information that they can feel confident that you're going to survive the upcoming fiscal year and do a great job. Remember that my panelists come from across the country. I always have at least one panel every year with a person from every U.S. time zone. I do include maps, and those maps are both geographical and contextual. But don't assume that they know the first thing about your community. So give them enough information to evaluate where you are in the world. And I do really want you to call and ask questions. I'm easier to reach via email. It allows me time to process your question better and give you a more thought out response. Plus you have proof of what I've said in that case. But if you like phone calls, then that's fine as well, especially if it's just a real quick question. I do try to counsel the panelists about elitism of being too finicky about grammar, punctuation, and the occasional typo in these applications. I remind them that not everybody or every organization is going to have a paid full-time grant writer. As a matter of fact, most of them don't. And therefore they should be cognizant of that. However, do make sure that you plan time into this process for a second set of eyes to look at your long text responses. So I'll coach my panelists to be less snooty, and I'll coach you to proofread, and maybe we can all meet somewhere in the middle and have a little grace for each other. But I do encourage at least having one proofreading process with an extra set of eyes, not yours. Again, the deadline is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm sorry to the Central Time Zone. I do know that Kentucky has two time zones. I used to live in Central Time Zone, so I understand how complicated it can be sometimes. I do not offer extensions except in the case of federally recognized natural disasters. I don't do that to be draconian. It's just really subjective, and it gums up the works on what is already a really tight turnaround schedule in order to get these adjudicated and go to the board. So know that deadline and don't submit at 11:59. And remember that it is the Eastern Time Zone. This is my contact information. As you're going through this application, if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. That first 502 number is my office. The 270 is my personal cell phone, and I actually use that more often for text than I do for phones, because I will probably not answer your call immediately if I don't recognize the number, but I'm happy to answer questions via text as well. I'm also going to be hosting open office hours throughout January, and closer to the deadline, I will make myself available after hours. I know many of you all don't have full-time paid staff, and some of you all might be working on this application during dinner time or in the evening, and I want to make sure that I have some availability for you all then as well. And then just as one last plug, I do hope to see you all on January 10th. It's very important, especially to this application or for this particular program that relies so heavily on the support from the General Assembly, that we show up and show out and celebrate the arts, but also let them know about the impact that the arts has on this state. The Kentucky Arts Partners are the state's arts infrastructure. To me, you are as important as the roads and the plumbing and all of the other aspects of infrastructure, and I hope to see you there, and best of luck on your application.